Greetings, all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. Today we're going to be counting down my top 10 personal favorite episodes of Amazing Stories. And if you don't know what Amazing Stories is, it was a short-lived anthology series created by Steven Spielberg that ran in the mid-80s, and it spanned all kinds of different genres: action, adventure, comedy, science fiction, horror, and this is kind of a follow-up to my retrospective video that I already did on Amazing Stories, so be sure to check that out if you haven't. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So this is my top 10 favorite episodes of Amazing Stories. At number 10, we have The Pumpkin Competition. This one follows a rich, stingy, and miserable old woman who is livid about losing her local county pumpkin growing contest 22 years in a row, and so she ends up getting help from a mysterious botanist for the next competition, which causes her pumpkin to grow to abnormal size. This one is sort of one that is a lot more lighthearted and silly, I would say, of the series, and not much really happens, and initially it seems, pretty innocent, but what really makes this a great episode is the ending. And of course, I'm not going to reveal what happens in the end, but let's just say that it is a pretty good twist. I would say it's a pretty fun twist that I think makes the journey going through this worthwhile, and overall it's a pretty fun episode to watch. It's nothing special, but it's one that I've watched a couple of times and I've always enjoyed it, so I decided that it was, worth it putting on the list. So that's The Pumpkin Competition at number 10. At number 9, we have Such Interesting Neighbors. This one follows a suburban family living in their new home who start experiencing bizarre incidents such as rattlesnakes, howling coyotes, sudden earthquakes, and time warps. This is another one that I would say is very lighthearted. We don't want to spoil exactly what happens in the end, but it is kind of, the ending twist that kind of makes it worth a watch. And it is one that you can kind of see coming, I think, from a mile away, but it still makes the ultimate reveal a fun one, and definitely I think one of the better episodes of the series overall. It's just a fun watch, and the characters are pretty likable and funny, and yeah, it's a good one. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I like this one. So that's Such Interesting Neighbors at number 9. And then at number 8, we have Gather Ye Acorns. This one stars Mark Hamill, who plays the main character of Jonathan Quick, who lives in a practical world and is the bane of his practical parents' existence. He meets an ancient tree troll and takes his advice to pack up all his treasured belongings and follow his heart. This one is a really interesting one because at first you're not really sure where it's going. The tree troll tells him that if he keeps on to all of his belongings and he never works a day in his life, that he will be more richer than anybody that he knows. So the episode, ends up, passing by multiple decades, and it shows that he's basically really poor, and all he has is his own things that he's collected. And when the tree troll comes back again, he is mad at him because he's like, you promised me that I would be more richer than anybody I've ever known. And the tree troll just kind of says, well, rich is sort of a relative term, and it's sort of one that, you're not really sure where it's going until the very, very end. Probably the last 4 or 5 minutes, it finally kind of comes together in a really, really interesting way. And it's one that initially I didn't really like that much the first time I watched it, but as I've watched it more and more, I have come to really like it more and more and more. I won't reveal what happens and how it ends, but it's definitely worth sticking with. And honestly, Mark Hamill, I think, has always been, a really underrated actor. And this was one of the first things he did after, the Star Wars trilogy. And I really think that he shined here, and especially later in the episode where they show him kind of, in the old man makeup and everything. And just his performance is really, really convincing. Where at first time I watched it, I was like, is that Mark Hamill or is that a different actor? But no, it's Mark Hamill. So it's a good one. I really like this one. Again, I don't think it'd be everybody's cup of tea, but yeah, it's one that I really like a lot. And then at number 7, we have Mirror Mirror. This one is directed by Martin Scorsese and focuses on a famous horror novelist who, while guesting on a talk show, claims that he is immune to being frightened. by the nightmarish creatures that he creates in his novels. He ultimately comes to regret that taunt as he ends up being terrorized by a black cape phantom who only appears in reflections, and he is the only one that appears to see him. It's one of the more darker, sort of more straight horror episodes of the series, and as a horror fan, of course, episode was very, very welcome to me. And it's one of the, I think, very few times, or it might be the only time as far as I'm aware of, that Martin Scorsese has done something that's more of a straight horror story. I guess you could kind of consider Cape Fear to be a horror film, but this is definitely, you know, very much a straight classic, you know, horror story, and very much feels like a classic, you know, Twilight Zone-esque type of episode. And honestly, it's really, really effective. Like, there's actually a lot of legitimately good, you know, scare and suspense moments in this. And the way that they filmed it and the way that they did the shots with like the cracked mirror and him seeing like the reflections in all the different places, it's really great. And it's a very, very simple episode that not much happens in it, but it's just very, very effective and well done, and has an ending that will really freak you out. I think it's probably one of the freakiest endings of the entire series. So yeah, if you're looking for more of a straight up horror episode of the series, then Mirror Mirror is definitely one that you should have on your watch list. So that's Mirror Mirror at number 7. At number 6, we have Dorothy and Ben. This one follows an old man named Ben Dunphy who suddenly emerges from a 40-year coma, finds that he has a special mental communication with Dorothy, a comatose 7-year-old in the floor below him. This ultimately leads to an even greater miracle, but unfortunately, there's a price. This one is more of a sort of, you know, fantasy-based one, or of a hard-hitting drama at the same time. Probably of the entire series, the episode that has the most sort of emotional depth. This one and one of the ones that Steven Spielberg directed, The Mission, are the two that probably have the most amount of sort of, you know, emotional depth in them, I would say. But this one, I think, even more so. And yeah, again, this is another one that I would say I don't think is going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it's just a really, really nice story that's just really, really short. But honestly, I think they could have expanded this into a film, and I think had they expanded this into a film and done it right, I think it could have been, you know, even an Oscar winning or Oscar nominated one, because all the performances in this are great. Really, really great one, and definitely a little bit of a tearjerker at the end as well. But it's a really great episode. So that's Dorothy and Ben at number 6. At number 5, we have Life on Death Row, starring Patrick Swayze, who plays a death row inmate who, hours before his scheduled execution, tags along on an escape plan and ultimately gets an electric shock that miraculously gives him the power to heal others. This one is kind of an interesting one looking back at it now, because it's basically very, very, very similar. The Green Mile, which of course the book that was of course written by Stephen King and then later adapted into a film, that would not come out until, you know, many, many years after this, and supposedly Stephen King was not aware of this and had not seen this, so it's just kind of a coincidence that they're you know, very similar. But technically this did come first. This actually did come before even the book of The Green Mile was written. So if this episode was to come out today, it would just kind of be seen as just kind of a ripoff of The Green Mile. But it came out before The Green Mile, so I don't think you can fairly judge it as that. It's just, I think it's just kind of unfortunate that it's very, very similar to it. And this, of course, starring Patrick Swayze. You know, Patrick Swayze was always a great actor, and this was kind of one that went before Patrick Swayze really became, you know, mega famous with, you know, Dirty Dancing and Roadhouse and Ghost and all that. But he is still really, really great in this one. This one was directed by Mick Garris. This is one of the very first things that Mick Garris ever directed, and he was the lead story editor on Amazing Stories. The only part of it that I'm not the biggest fan of is the ending, because it kind of, for me personally, it kind of leaves me wanting more. But it still is great, and it works very, very effective as this, you know, interesting episode. And again, very much follows the same plot. You know, if you can get over the fact that it kind of follows the same plot of The Green Mile, it is a fantastic episode. So that's Life on Death Row at number 5. And then at number 4, we have You Gotta Believe Me. This one stars Charles Durning, who plays a man convinced that his vivid nightmare of a Boeing 747 crash into his house is in fact a horrific premonition. This episode is another one that for the most part is pretty simple, but it's done really, really effectively and is really, really moody and incredibly well shot. You're kind of there with the character and you're thinking, is it just a nightmare? Is it something that's really happening? And so what he ends up doing is that he ends up getting up in the middle of the night in his pajamas and goes down, and he basically lives right next door to the airport. He can see the airport from his house, and so he drives down there and he goes there, and initially it's it's all quiet and everything, and it's really, the music in this one is probably my favorite of the entire series because it's really moody, and again, this one is really well directed, and there's a lot of like really far away shots of him just walking in the airport and there's no one around, and it's really interesting because for the first half of the episode, he's sort of going around in the airport, and initially it doesn't seem like there's anything that is unusual, and he doesn't see anything that looks anything like what was in his dream. So he ends up kind of at one point going away, and he sees this newspaper stand that reports about another recent plane crash, and so he ultimately decides to go back to the airport. And initially he doesn't really seem like there's anything to indicate that it's real, until all of a sudden he hears this song, and he slowly turns around and he sees this little girl with this little bear toy singing this familiar song, which he saw in his dream, all half burned up just on the floor outside of his house in his dream. And that's the thing that tells him that, oh, this is actually real. And so then it becomes a thing of him trying to figure out how can he stop the plane from crashing, because he sees all the different people that were in his dream. That's You Gotta Believe Me at number 4. And then at number 3, we have The Amazing Falsworth. Amazing Falsworth is about a psychic who works at a nightclub, and just by touching people he can know personal details about them. But one night he gets unlucky when he picks up the vibes of a serial killer in the room. When he gets shocked and pulls the blindfold off, he discovers that the person he touched is no longer there. But he ultimately then ends up coming face to face with the serial killer himself. This one is definitely one of the more straight horror episodes of the series. It's just a really, really cool, moody, great concept. And definitely, again, I think, I wish that the show would have done more episodes like this, but it definitely works very, very well and is very suspenseful and legitimately, scary and interesting at the same time. And this one has a really, really great twist that I do think you kind of can see coming, but when it happens and when it's revealed, it still works incredibly well. Great episodes. That's The Amazing Falsworth at number 3. At number 2, we have Go to the Head of the Class. This one follows a teenage horror buff who is so smitten with his fellow classmate that he helps her use black magic on their loathsome English teacher, played by Christopher Lloyd, with both shocking and bewildering results. This was one of 2 hour-long episodes, the other being The Mission, directed by Steven Spielberg, and this one was directed by Robert Zemeckis. I do love, a bit of both horror and comedy. I think that's sort of one of, those are 2 sort of separate genres that I love it when, they kind of cross and kind of can meet to tell a story. And this one's just a really, really great one all around. Has a lot of great effects in it. Christopher Lloyd's performance in it is fantastic. It's just really well directed. You can tell that they put a little bit more of budget into sort of the hour-long episodes, and it seems like the whole thing of the hour-long episodes was something that they were going to do, sort of like do one of them each season. And honestly, I think, considering how good this one was and the other hour-long one was, maybe they should have considered, maybe having more of the episodes be an hour long instead of just doing one a season. But I guess, part of that comes down to time and budget and everything. But this is definitely, ultimately, I think, it's definitely one of the best. And I think a lot of people would say it is the best. But yeah, it's another one that has, a great ending to it as well. Sort of last final reveal. And yeah, it's just a really, really fun watch all around. But there was just one other one that slightly beat it out for me. So that's Go to the Head of the Class at number 2. Then finally, at number 1, we have Mummy Daddy, another horror comedy one. This one follows a dedicated actor who is working in the Bayou Swamps and is in a very realistic mummy costume that he can't take off while shooting his movie. But when he hears that his wife is in labor in a hospital nearby, he runs towards town, but unfortunately the local rednecks think that he is in fact the real deal and form a posse to go after him. This episode is just a blast. It's just fun, and I just absolutely love the concept of this one. And if you're a fan of a lot of like the old sort of, Universal horror movies and stuff, I think that you'll get a kick out of this one. About halfway through, he then ends up running into an actual mummy. So then we have both the real mummy and a fake mummy running around as well, and it's just really fun. It's just so much fun to watch, and so I knew that this one had to be number one when I was making the list. It's just a fantastic episode, and definitely, my personal favorite of the series, and much like a lot of the other episodes, ends up having, a great twist at the end as well. So that's Mummy Daddy at number 1. So there we go, guys. That was my list of top 10 favorite episodes of Amazing Stories. Be sure to jump in the comments down below. Let me know what your top 10 personal favorite episodes of Amazing Stories are. And yeah, so until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible. And I will see you in the next video.